build ensemble, build things. So, well, welcome. We are starting our National Conference on Sacred Music morning coffee this morning. And we have wonderful guests with us today that I will introduce. Yes, cheers to everyone. I will introduce in just a moment. Let me say a couple of things about the what's on the National Conference of Sacred Music website today. We've added some new sessions, and there's actually going to be a bonus Saturday session that is going to be added. That if you're interested, Tom Trenny has sent us a link to his program that is going to be at Nebraska Wesleyan University, and that program will be available via link on Saturday. There has been a little bit of trouble with some of the links for reading session packets, but I think that has been taken care of now, and it should be all okay. We really appreciate the wonderful feedback that we've had from each of you. And then don't forget that today at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, there will be a live session, webinar session with Jim Rindelab from ALCM and Michael Burkhart. And so that will be at 2 p.m. Eastern, and it will be live and it will be recorded, and all of these sessions will be available on the website until the end of January. So this morning we have wonderful guests with us who have all been on the faculty of NCSM at one point or another. And I thought it would be great to talk with them about kind of what they've been experiencing, but also looking forward to these days when we're going to be starting to reassemble in choirs and in churches and moving us forward again. So I thought it would be a good time to start that discussion. Even though we may not be there yet, I can tell that that's kind of what we're all starting to think about. So let me introduce everyone. First of all, we have Professor Mel Bringle from Brevard College, and she's known as an extraordinary hymn writer, theologian, teacher, and just all-around wonderful person. So we're really glad that she could be here with us, and we enjoyed when she could be a part of our faculty at NCSM. Also have Tim Waugh, who's the conductor of the Charlotte Bronze, and is also a church musician and an educator, and very active in leading handbell conferences around the country. Have Eric Nelson, who's the director of choral activities at Emory University, also the conductor of the Atlanta Master Chorale, and also for a number of years was a regular church musician every Sunday. So he brings not only the college and professional background, he brings the church music background as well. And then David Sherwin, who's cantor at Mount Olive Lutheran Church and has been on the faculty a couple of times. David is obviously known as an organist and as a composer and as the conductor of the National Lutheran Choir, so wears many hats and has a finger in many pots, as I should say, yes, and is quite the connoisseur of cars. If you ever just want to talk about cars, talk to David. So. And then finally, we have, but not least, Anton Armstrong, conductor of the St. Olaf Choir, and who was also, some people don't realize, is one of the founders and works with the youth chorus at the Oregon Bach Festival. That's another hat that he wears. That's a very big and important hat. And of course, Anton conducts around the world and very present in the education of many college choral conductors that are in the world today. So thank you for all being here. Welcome. And we're glad that you've taken time to join us this morning. I want to kind of go around for a moment and just ask each one of you to share a little bit about what this kind of what life has been like for you since COVID started, kind of what you've been trying to accomplish, what your groups have been doing, how they've been functioning. Just give us a little bit of a background on that. And Tim, you're the first one on top of my screen here. I'm going to start with you.
That's fine. Charlotte Bronze is a community group who's been doing some very creative things, I think. Instead of meeting together in a full group, we have invited family members and sort of moved into what would be handbell pods, 2, 3, 4 people that are ringing together. So our Christmas program, our holiday program this year, was predominantly small ensembles. 2 of my ringers actually arranged pieces for the program, which really made me very happy. Very creative things happening so that we were not inhibited by Corona, although we don't get to meet and see each other face to face. We have been finding creative ways through Zoom and other ways to continue discussion, ringing, and just getting together to be handbell family. So that's what we've been doing.
And I will say that in our own church, I conduct a handbell choir. Handbells has been one of the things we've been able to continue to do. If I pick the right literature, we spread around the whole sanctuary and actually play once a month, but it's certainly different. But yeah, it's one of those things we've been able to continue. So that's good.
Definitely.
So Eric, talk a little bit about your situation.
I have 2 groups, as you mentioned, my school choir at Emory and Atlanta Master Chorale. They've pivoted slightly differently. The heartbreaking thing last March was when we realized that we were not able to get back to campus together, and I realized that I wasn't going to be able to say goodbye to the seniors. The heartwarming part of this year so far is that everybody who ordinarily would have signed up for choir did, even though we've not been able to be together. And I had a robust freshman class audition for this ensemble that is only existing mostly virtually. So I think that says something about how important this is to people under whatever circumstances we can give them. Atlanta Master Chorale was fortunate to have a lot of recordings, video recordings of concerts, either complete or in part. And we pivoted to dispersing, I guess, is that the word? Presenting those pieces kind of one piece at a time every Monday. We've done every Monday since this began. And a lot of people have said that that's been important. And oddly enough, I think more people have found us nationally than would have in the regular situation where people that live nearby come to the concert. And we've done as best we can, we've tried to keep in contact with each other with both ensembles as family, just by being in touch with each other any way that we can, mostly over Zoom.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I've been impressed with both the Atlanta Master Chorale and the National Lutheran Choir correspondence by email and what you've been able to put out, and the connection that I've been able to feel with both groups sitting in St. Louis. Even though I've been kind of involved with both groups in the past, the connection feels even stronger right now, just because I've been able to participate more. So that's really good, very good. So Mel, tell us about what you've been doing.
I work in a liberal arts college context and not a church context. So my situation is a little different from those of you who are church musicians, but I know there are a lot of academicians in your group as well, so they will relate to the challenges of teaching online as opposed to face-to-face, or the challenges of teaching face-to-face when you can only see students from the bridge of the nose up, and you have to learn 40 new names in a classroom. The interesting thing about that is now I don't recognize students when I see them full face on Zoom, because there are all kinds of kids who've been hiding facial hair under the mask and I didn't know it was there. But it's, developing a community when you're not face-to-face. We will be starting classes on January 19th, and we will start online. So it'll be the challenge of trying to get people to bond with one another when we are physically distanced from one another. And that's always a challenge. The innovation challenge, which every church musician has had, every teacher has had as well. What tools do we have that are available to us digitally that can facilitate participation? That's been fun. That's been a steep learning curve, but it's also been stimulating. And then there have been challenges of writing texts for the occasion. Since you mentioned handbells, I'll just mention that I wrote a text recently for Psalm 47 in which the congregational part is simply clapping. So there's a cantor who can sing the text, but the congregation does not sing. The congregation uses clapping patterns so that they can participate in music making without spewing forth virus.
Clever.
That's great. I was just going to ask how has this changed some of your text writing?
Well, and that's one obvious way that I've tried to write a text that the congregation can participate in without singing. There are other things that I can talk about, and we'll do that when we talk about our specific ways of coping with this challenge.
Good. David Sherwin?
Well, it was a very big shock in March, both for the church that I serve and the choir. Both places are very, very relational. We work very hard at relationships with each other and find what we do very deeply meaningful and important. So to suddenly not be able to do that together was very tricky. But in both cases, we moved to a virtual way of connecting and providing what we do. And both drawing heavily from our recordings from the past, as you have, Eric, too, which is, it's been life-saving. I mean, at first it was life-giving because it would help me remember what we do, what the product outcome was. And I recall listening to one of our recordings we did of Brahms' Let Nothing Ever Grieve Thee, and it just opened a floodgate of emotions that had been trapped. It just reinforces how important music is for that. It helps us deal with this stuff in a way that we can't quite explain. But rather than just replaying them, what we've done in both cases, actually, Mount Olive and with the National Lutheran Choir, is repurposed those recordings so that we create new experiences that we present using older material. So it's kind of like new wineskins. But that's been also very life-giving. So for the National Lutheran Choir, well, for church, it's been that we can send out each week examples of vibrant hymn singing because we've got years and years of recorded liturgies for shut-ins. Ironically, we didn't realize that was going to be all of us. But those, I'm much happier experiencing hymnody that way, that you can hear the assembly, the full assembly, the spontaneity that happens at our church in hymnody. And that is alive and well, and we all yearn to be making it live again. And it's encouraging to hear how well they sing. My gosh, I listen to those recordings and just think, good grief, I've been taking that for granted.
Yeah. And I want to come back to that in a little while because I think that's something that's fairly unique. I'm not seeing a lot of other churches do that. And I really do think it's a great idea as we start to come back to remind them of what it was like, So maybe we can come back to that, talk a little bit more about that later too. So.
Sure. Yeah, and then with the National Lutheran Choir, the new dimension that's been delightful to discover, and it's mainly through the specific interests and talents of two of our singers, adding visuals to what we present. When we do a concert, we don't think about that. Some of us don't think about that too much, but to have nothing except soundtrack, and you need to add something to it. What we found, like for our All Saints program, for example, is adding a human face or a human dimension to the emotion that people feel. So that's had a very powerful effect. And I would also, as we talk about continuously, is very risky because you can really cross an appropriate line and begin to feel manipulative with things like that. But I've just been moved by the things that they've come up with, and it adds a whole different lens through which we hear the music, just by what we're seeing. So
and Anton, I think you did both things this year with your Christmas program. You had some things from the past, but you also did some new things in masks and all of that. So you did a combination.
Well, let me just go back to the spring, because we were fortunate to finish our domestic tour, which celebrated the 100th anniversary of that first major tour the National Choir took in 1920. Though I have to admit, I think we may have had COVID on that tour. But when we had to disperse, like Eric said, the hard thing was to see our seniors, not be able to see them and say goodbye to them. So we did one virtual thing that I knew about. The other one was a virtual thing they pulled on me. But we did a recording of Beautiful Saviors, which is the Salem Choir's signature piece, the F. Males Chris Johnson setting of that. And we went through the operation. I thought I was too old to have to learn new platforms to teach on, but you can teach an old dog new tricks, and Zoom and I become friends. The other thing, just with church musicians, we were starting to get a lot of requests for the Great Hymns of Faith albums that we produce, and people wanted to use them in worship. And so again, David, to some degree is what you were saying. You see things that have been out there for years, and people find a renewal and a retooling of those things, and to know that they are useful. And to the degree that we could make this available free, we did that. So that that has been rewarding to know that they can still play an active role in people's ministry. And Mark, as you said, we pushed through. St. Olaf is a place that will always try this, I guess, stubborn Norwegians, but they will try to do things. And we spent a lot of time researching, but we had a couple of curves, right? We decided to move our semester up by 3 weeks and to push through without a fall break to Thanksgiving. And we were successful in that. But about 3 days before we were to start in August, we had a new epidemiologist the college brought aboard. And we found out all of our rehearsal spaces in our music building were not COVID, the HVAC system was not up to COVID standards. So unlike my friends in the South, we could not just move out. We were outside for about 10 days and under tented pavilion, but we also had 7 inches of snow in October. So we moved inside, but we were in smaller groups, 9 feet apart, masked, and we were rehearsing our larger groups in 2 halves. And we had 30 minutes to throw them together to do a video recording, but we wanted something for our students to work for. We also needed that sense of community. The George Floyd murder was in our backyard, and down the street from David,
Right.
down the street from David. And yet our students were very concerned about this. And I think being in the college of the church, it wasn't just a historical thing. They took very much to task their responsibility. And still in a reasonably predominantly white institution, how do we address that? And so for my programming of the 4 or 5 pieces, because we were cut down to only 30 minutes of rehearsal a couple times a week, I focused on the voices of racial justice and love, but I wanted that to come in all forms, and how do we speak to that? Tom Trenny has a wonderful setting of We Shall Overcome. But I also wanted to include something of this ethos of this school, and Ulayelo's setting of Ubi Caritas, where there's charity and love, there's God. And we needed to hear that. And one of the last pieces Moses Hogan wrote before he passed away much too early was he put together, lift every voice and sing with my country dignity. And to know that we are all Americans. We are United States of America. And so we try to address that as well. The Christmas offerings, you said one was an archival program, which we couldn't put together Christmas. We didn't even know for a long time if we were going to be able to even sing together because of that HVAC situation. But we did put together each of the choral ensembles learning what they could. And then for a Christmas program, I did archival materials we've been streaming the last 4 or 5 years. And then we have, every 4 years or so, we've had PBS specials. So while I put together a curated program that was primarily in the last 4 or 5 years, I also featured colleagues who have been here in the past, and also wanted to say, Mel Bringle has a wonderful text, Light Dawns in a Weary World. Mm-hmm. And we asked Mac Wilbur to do a new setting of that for us 4 years ago. That text, Mel, I tell you, mm-hmm. It spoke to right now. And the immortality of those text writers and how music lifts that up. And so we've struggled. It's not been easy answers. I think we've all found, those of us who were able to meet in person, if you take the proper precautions, singing does not have to be a super spreader. But even in our own worship on the St. Olaf campus, we have a fully established congregation of the ELCA, we would have live music every week, but it was by a quartet of singers with our cantor, James Bobb. And we use sign language as a response to the congregation to respond. So I'm learning some sign language, and not always, I hope I'm saying the right things at the right time. But we found inventive ways of still coming together. I experienced in my own home congregation here in Northville, Bethel Lutheran. I guess I found out what Robert Schuller must have felt like when he started Christ Cathedral with the drive-in church. Because we had drive-in church summer, and then we did that for Christmas Eve. And I had to read one of the lessons that evening, and it was 4 degrees outside. So, you know, we got a real typical Minnesota. We finally got snow on December 23rd. But people have been inventive. And I think musicians and church leaders are resilient folks. When you need to preach the word of God, you find a way to do it.
Yeah. Let me ask you all, particularly those of you who've been conducting choirs, because this was a problem for me. I sang in a Christmas program and I used the mask and I was distanced, but I couldn't hear anybody else. And when I got done, I was pretty hoarse because I think I was over singing because of feeling like I needed to blend, but not hearing anybody else. You know, how are you? What would you say to the church musicians who are out there starting to conduct their choirs, who are trying to do something with masks? Is there any secrets about trying to get a blend or to get people to hear each other in a different way? What would you say about that? Eric, why don't we start with you? What have you experienced?
I was afraid you were going to come to me first. This is, it was a very eloquently phrased description of the nature of the problem. I've found it to, I must admit that I've not solved this one yet. That for me, it's not just the wearing of the mask, although I do find that it is, even if you wear one of those specially designed masks, which we've tried, that it's still awkward. And it's still, you know, it feels like you've got on a voice mute. And I find that it's difficult for me, wherever I am on the podium, to feel like I'm hearing everybody. I find I keep saying, you know, could you sing just a little louder? You know, especially to the freshmen, because I'm not sure whether they're just being timid, right? And I need to teach them, you know, the resonance of their voice, and you know, that blend is not the absence of color, but the unification of color, all that kind of stuff that one does as a pedagogue. Or are they singing great and I just can't hear them? And then there's the distance problem. For much of the semester at Emory, we were only allowed to have freshmen on campus. That was one of the ways that the university controlled the possible spread of the virus. So I was only conducting, you know, a dozen or so people. And even that was difficult. But then toward the end of the semester, we were allowed to have any upperclassmen that lived near campus, or perhaps were on campus as RAs already in the dorms. And so I doubled the number of people that were allowed in the concert hall. And I had, 10 or 12 on the stage and 10 or 12 in the audience. So if you can imagine a typical medium-sized concert hall, Anton's been to our space at Emory several times. If you can imagine, you know, an alto underneath the organ at the back of the stage, and then another alto under the balcony out in the hall, right? And I'm telling them that, you know, they need to unify the vowel, and if someone's a little out of tune, I'll bring it up, and they look at me like, okay, if you say so. And so I guess I continue to just kind of do the best I can, and am waiting to be allowed. I'm expecting first to be allowed to be closer together. I think that'll solve a huge amount of it. And then ultimately, of course, to be able to take the mask off. And even with the vaccine, we don't know when that's going to happen. But for me, it's just been kind of making the best of it. And as I said earlier, I've been heartened that the students are okay with that. They understand. and they're willing to do what they can under these circumstances. Same for the virtual choir piece of it, which is also, I find, profoundly unsatisfying, and we've all done a version of that. And again, those that are in that situation, I've got students spread out all over the country. They're making the best of it.
Yeah. Anybody else have something you want to add on this?
Sure. What we found is that how the room that I use, I mean, we're kind of wandering Israelites. We don't have a performance home that we live with. And so one of the things this pandemic has kind of forced, and it's been a gift, is choosing a space to go with what we got. Because we've done some small group things with up to 12 singers, but I can use a space where they can kind of be in a circular formation and still be 12 feet apart and hear each other pretty well. And some surprising places. We did one piece in an airplane hangar with acoustics to kill, and everybody heard everybody just fine, you know, and it was quite something. And the piece we sang was "Sooner We'll Be Done with the Trouble of the World," and so the context of the airplane hangar was pretty. Everybody who made that recording was affected by that. You know, it was like, here we are in this place, this very unusual place.
Yeah.
The other thing is the virtual singing recordings. That's been something that's been a huge struggle because it's very doable, safe, obviously, but I can't think of any of our singers that loved doing that. None of them liked the sound of their own voice. A couple of singers said, you know, I'll just join you again when we can gather, because I don't like the sound of my voice and I don't want to do that. And it's like, well, that's the point. You know, you put all those together and that makes it good or magical, but it's a challenge to keep.
Mark, I would just add to that. Yeah, they did it, but it's not fulfilling.
Right.
When you're singing in isolation. It has worked. I mean, Andre Thomas has been a visiting professor at Yale, and he, because of platforms that allow people, he had people from all over the country joining and doing an incredible Advent concert. Not the way any of us want to make music. You introduced me to the St. Olaf Choir, which, yes, that's a main part. I also direct a non-audition choir here at St. Olaf of treble voices. And that group is normally 75 to 80. Well, I have a number of faculty and staff who just were not going to do something like this. And I had just a lot of students in that non-audition group who said, I'm not going to risk this. So that group is normally 75 to 80. I had 25. Mm-hmm. And we were in our chapel, but they're spread out, and they were 25 who were not confident singers. And maybe I haven't had that same level in 40 years when I first started teaching Calvin College. And I was 40 years younger, you know, and the energy. But each week was, yes, we can. Yes, we can. I mean, literally the first two rehearsals, I barely heard these 25 singers. By the end, I mean, I was so overjoyed when we finally did that final video recording session on All Saints weekend, because they learned a lesson, and they sang actually well. I had to pick the right literature for them. I had to change literature a couple of times, and I saw them once a week for 30 minutes, you know? So no auditions, and yet it reminded me I could be a teacher. So I was reinforced in that. But it also gave them, I think, this whole experiment, and with our church choirs, I would say the same thing. We have so many of our singers who sometimes always wanted to be dependent on somebody else to lead them. And these 25 young women found that, yes, they could, you know, and they were still finding their voices and still finding a way. But it was important for them to express themselves.
Yeah.
It's important.
Yeah.
And it was important for them to be in some type of community, not the size group they're used to, where maybe these 25 were used to hanging on somebody else's, but they could do it. And the pride in their faces, as Mel said, when you see above the mask, you know, and the joy. And that group I could only do two pieces with, but we did them well, and they felt good about the contribution, and they kept saying thank you for making this happen for us, you know, and not just giving up.
Yeah.
Right.
So let me turn it just a little bit and back to congregational worship. I'm going to direct this to you, Mel. But have you seen ways in which congregations have done better in connecting during this time of online than other ways, or creative ways in which they've been able to continue their worship traditions? Any words about that during this time that you think we've evolved?
Well, I think David made a really excellent point by saying we've all been shut-ins. And I think we have experienced what it's like not to be able to be physically present with the gathered community, and that's given us a new sensitivity to those who have been deprived of that experience and now have it available to them. I mean, it's been wonderful, the number of churches I've been able to worship with on a Sunday morning without leaving home, where I wouldn't normally have that opportunity. And we've actually found our membership participation on Sunday mornings greater during the pandemic than it was during face-to-face, because members who had moved to another part of the country could come back and worship with their old church family. Relatives could see, oh, this is what your church is like. So I think on the one hand, our community has in fact grown in some ways, and our sensitivities have been enlarged. I think we've also had an opportunity, and this is of course my bias anyway, to focus on the text in a way that we may not when we're focusing on what we sound like. Because when we're singing, and I'm as guilty of this as anybody, I can, read the alto line and feel as if I'm making beautiful harmony with the person sitting next to me, and close the hymnal, put it back in the pew, and have no clue what I have just sung, because I've been too focused on the notes. And when we aren't doing that, there has been a real opportunity to look at text, to try out hymns we might never be bold enough to sing yet, and experience them textually and unpack that text. And as David also said, to pair that text with visual image in a way that pulls in a kind of multi-sensory learning experience. So I think those things have been rich opportunities for us that we can carry forward even post-pandemic.
I really like the idea and the thought about the text. Having watched many concerts, I will say that it's always helpful to me when there's super titles or when the texts are running across the bottom or whatever, particularly if the choir is doing something with a mask. Our diction is always needs improving anyway, but when they're doing it with the mask, sometimes it's just so hard, and reading a text and looking at the screen back and forth is hard. I know it takes extra effort to run the texts across, but I think it's really nice as we go. And Tim, you don't have to just weigh in on bells. You can weigh in on everything. I know you do a lot of other things as well. But
I was just about to weigh in on a couple of things. I was really lucky in October to do one of the town halls for the Presbyterian Association of Musicians. And what we were talking about, and thank you, Mel, for doing the things with clapping. We were talking about tuned and untuned instruments, and actually having families at home make homemade instruments. And then in the midst of text, I was talking with one congregation right before Pentecost, and there was a mix. They were partially virtual and partially in person. And I suggested that they look at the Pentecost text and bring out key words, and at those words, ring a tiny bell, spirit, wind, and you've got that sound going. That not only engaged the adults in the text, but it also engaged the kids, because they're listening for those key words, those key ideas. Same thing with handbells. You can hand out pentatonic sets of bells to the congregation and have them ring instead of sing, and prompt them, at different places. So I think this has been a time, some people may say, we can't do what we always have done. And I think we're kind of blessed in that, because we're taking a step back and going, so what else can we do? What is it that we can make happen? And I've seen a lot of creativity springing up from people who are saying, okay, so we can't sing, we can clap, we can ring, we can, make other sounds that are in praise of God. And very strongly, I think that our priorities have changed as far as worship goes and as far as music goes. We used to be very concerned about what the congregation, what the crowd out there would hear. We're seeing, or I am seeing, an awful lot more that we are ministering to the people who want to make music and are not so concerned about how perfect or how wonderful it is for the congregation, but allowing them to be fed by music making in any way that we can possibly do.
Yeah.
So I'm excited with what I'm hearing. This is
Well,
great.
you bridged what I want to go to very well. What I want to do for the next few minutes is kind of focus on, as we move into the situations where we're going to start rebuilding our community in person, or when we're going to start singing. I think that all of you have you've got unique experiences in that you've worked with choirs that have to either be new or reassemble every year, whereas most church musicians kind of have dealt with the same choir, same group of people, and they add a person, but they don't reconstitute, they don't restart. What are things that you would say for a congregation starting up worship again, or choir meeting again for the first time in a year? I know I walked into our handbell room where I conduct a handbell rehearsal, and my order for March rehearsal was still on the board. Nobody has been in the room since I wrote the order of the rehearsal on the board, So, when you haven't done this for a year, what suggestions would you have about that? What do you think we should be looking at doing differently, or the way that we should be reconstituting ourselves? And now maybe David Sherwin, let's start with you on that one.
Yeah, well, I live in.
You were the one that looked the most puzzled by my question, so I thought, let's start there.
Well, it's one of the, it's a challenge, because Mount Olive is, it's a wonderful building, that was built in the 1920s. And the parish hall where the choir rehearsal is, which Paul Mons designed, because that's where he was, is acoustically fabulous, but it's one of the lowest and most difficult rooms to get to. And so when HVAC systems were redone over the years, that room kind of got left out. So I have to figure out that one right off before people, even with the vaccines, I think people are going to go, that room just isn't very healthy. If we're going to conspire together, breathe together, we have to have some safe air. But I think it's an emotional thing. And I think that part of my I hate to use the word strategy because that's not the total truth, but I've been, the recordings that we put out each week for liturgies, for people to use for their at-home liturgy, helps keep the memory alive of that end of what we work towards when we're preparing music in a normal context. And I have been extra diligent to be sure the choir is a big part of that, so that those recordings include things the choir has done, and especially the children's groups that we have. And of course, kids love to hear themselves on a recording, but we've always understood them to be equal partners in our worship and what we sing. And so I've made sure to include those in the recordings. But beyond that, I think people just are going to want to know that it's safe. Mm-hmm. Even with the vaccine, I think that's the biggest question to overcome, is how is it safe? And how is it all inclusive? The other challenge that we already have is dealing with varying levels of protocol for staying safe, because some people say, oh, come on, we could do this. And others are saying, and how do you not create the cool people and the scaredy cats, have two separate groups in an already divisive era that we're living in. So I think those are the challenges, and I don't have good answers.
Right. So Anton, when you see a choir for the first time in that new semester, what are some things that you do at the beginning?
Maybe more to help. Again, I'm going to go to my collegiate chorale, because that's a group that I turn over half the St. Olaf choir, but they've come from other groups too. But my collegiate chorale are non-audition. I have people still finding their voices, even when we sing publicly, they're still finding their voices, and it's, what do I have? Who's there? That even in a given year, I only see them once a week for an hour. They're my church choir in that sense, and what do they need? I think when I think about restarting a group like that, you know, maybe can I rethink? And I had to do that this semester for that group very much. Can I rethink? I want them to sing. And for me, unison singing can be just as beautiful as part singing, you know? And so I'm not saying dumb down, but I am saying, can we think about what will feed their souls more at this point? And maybe not doing the hardest music, just because maybe you know, we get it hits our need. But what do the singers need? What do they need? And as Dave was saying, to make them feel safe. Again, being, if you've been able to sing, but you've had to be 9 feet apart, that may not change, you know, especially if you're like David's dealing with right now. I don't know what my rehearsal situation will be even next fall with the vaccine, but can I give them music? And I try to do, even with the Sentinel Choir, music that was more accessible, and one accessible from a musical level, but emotionally accessible. And I think that's when we talk about text. Have we really thought about what folks need as they come back into this environment? And I think David's right. There will be a lot of people who will be frightened, you know, and do we give them music that they can chew on? I had a student 2 nights ago. Well, it was the Epiphany. So it was after Washington, D.C. And it was a student who was in the Salem Choir 21 years ago when we did the first album of Great Hymns of Faith. And he said, I've been singing Abide With Me. And this is a guy who was a congregational, after he had a music degree, but he went back and he, for 2 years, didn't know if he wanted to teach. And he was congregational aid. And he personally gave me a tour in 2007 when the choir was out there. And he was crying. This is a 37-year-old man who was crying because the place he had grown to love was being desecrated. But what he turned to, and he wasn't necessarily as a student, I would say the most religious person, but Helen Kemp used to say, we plant seeds. And what seeds are we planting now in the minds and hearts of not just our choir members, but into those congregation members who need to have their hands held because they are afraid. And they come back and they're not afraid just to be in church. They're afraid about what the world is going to look like. And I think that's what we need to be thinking about. I know that's what I'm thinking about in my repertoire for my choirs here and as we gather next year. And what will bring us back into common ground? We have to find common ground. That piece that you're publishing now, Mark, I'm going to do next semester. I've just ordered it, you know, but that Alice Parker wrote. We have to find common ground. And I think we need to feed our folks, our singers in the choirs, or as John Ferguson would say, the big congregation, the big choir. We need to feed them with text that will help heal and be healing balms for them.
Right. If you don't know about this piece that Anton's referring to, Alice Parker was just so burdened by what she was feeling in society that she wrote this little piece that's about 2 minutes long called On the Common Ground. And it talks about how we should meet. It's a perfect New England piece. It's the kind of thing where you see everybody out on the commons trying to work this out, or in the community hall, you know, that's that kind of spirit to it. But it's just a little piece that she wrote because she was so burdened about it. And Philip Brunel then recorded it got some singers together, and then she offered it, and proceeds go to Chorus America, go to the Alice Parker Fund at Chorus America. So it's her little move to unite people through music. So just a little side note there. So Mel, do you mind addressing this from the congregational standpoint?
But let me address it as a theologian and not as a teacher or a text writer, so to speak. And my one sort of epiphany on this topic came on Epiphany, and it was, and this is not going to be big news to anybody, but God's people have been here before. So if we had the metaphor of being wandering in the wilderness or being in the Babylonian exile during our time of pandemic, we now have the metaphor of the return from exile. And our text for the day is Isaiah 56 to 66, that portion of the book that's written after the return to Jerusalem. And the word is build up, restore the ancient ruins. And yet the experience that people have is it's very disappointing. They were expecting the return to be glorious and all would be wonderful and the temple would rise again. It would be just like the olden days. And it wasn't. And there was factionalism, and there were the priestly exclusivists, and there was Isaiah's inclusivism, and there was all of this turmoil. And the word came from the prophet, yep, this is the way it is. We continue to suffer. God is still faithful. And I think we need to meditate upon that regularly. It is a more somber portion of Isaiah. And yet, as one critic said, there are moments of iridescence. And I think that's what we should expect. A fairly somber setting and moments of iridescence. And God is there in all of it.
Wow, thank you for that. Yeah, that's very important to think about. Yeah. So Eric, come to you. Any difference between starting your church choir, your Atlanta Master Chorale, and your Emory choirs? Do you start them the same way, or do you think of them in different?
Thank you, Mel. Before I move on, we're all appreciative of that perspective.
You are.
For me, it's another variant of what we've all been doing since the middle of March, which is scenario planning, right? There's plan A, plan B, plan C. And at one point, I remember telling people that they would, especially someone that I didn't know very well, be introducing myself, and I would say, I used to be a musician. Now I'm a crisis manager, and a sound engineer, and
a tech master, yes.
All that. But and a first-year teacher, by the way. All of us feel like we've never done these things before. But for me, it's part in terms of scenario planning. There's a part of me who is prepared to go back and, in fact, find that it's like we've never left. And everybody remembers the culture, and everybody still has a voice, and everybody is going to sing in tune. And I'm gonna, raise the level of the group from week to week and rehearsal to rehearsal, and we're all good to go. And then there's another part of me who is prepared to essentially start over, to have a group in front of me who has forgotten the old ways and those things that we do each rehearsal and each week and each year, the kind of culture of the org, the work ethic, the personal responsibility of holding your part while being aware of the others in the room, all those things, right? And so there's a big part of me who's prepared for, I don't know if you want to say the worst, because that's still a wonderful privilege, but prepared for that kind of level. And I'm kind of poised and ready, like a tennis player ready to return serve, who's ready to go either direction with whatever comes to me. I'm also excited that a lot of the technology that we've become comfortable with, whether delightfully or kicking and screaming, is a good idea. I mostly have done choir in person and made announcements in person and reminded them of what's coming up, and some emails here and there. And now everything has been through this portal, which at the university is called Canvas. And I've gotten really good at kind of posting announcements. And if a group is having a hard time with a part, I do a video about how to maybe do it better and maybe sit down at the piano. And there's all kinds of things that I'm doing that the technology right now is necessary. But I'm thinking to myself, this is a good idea. In the past, we've commissioned music, and the best you could hope for is that maybe the composer would come to the performance, and when it's all over, you point from the stage and they stand up and everybody looks, where's the composer? And you clap. Well, now we have some commissions that are coming, and we've zoomed in with the choir and the composer's talked about where they are in the composition and held up the manuscript and talked about where they are right now and what, there's, why didn't I do that before? Maybe all of you did, but I feel like when we are back to, whatever the moments of iridescence are that lie ahead of us, I think that some of the things that we've learned during this period will carry over as well. And that may be a good thing for us.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that it will. I really do. I think things have changed. And first of all, we couldn't do this because we didn't even know how to spell Zoom. We didn't know what that was, when this started. And now we do. And so I do think a lot of good things are going to carry over. So Tim, any last word on this before you?
Just an aside, taking off many of my hats and going back to my elementary school teaching time, our congregations are our biggest choir, and they probably will have to be discovering their voice once again. I can remember teaching elementary school students using call and response, verse for the teacher, refrain for the kids, something that was simple, that was able to be repeated. And I think that there's a great wealth of music in our tradition that speaks to that, that would be invaluable at starting back your biggest choir, your congregation. So that's a thought in that line.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mark, can I say what I'm looking forward to?
Sure.
Or what
that's where I'm turning to next. So okay. Our closing thoughts is, what are you looking forward to? So go ahead.
It's a combination of what I'm looking forward to and what I've realized I need. And I'm speaking personally now, although I think it probably applies to my singers and the congregations and audiences as well. I've talked, as many of us do, about the importance of choral music as an art form and the relationship between sound and text and meaning, and that it takes the whole spirit to the whole person to sing and rejoice, as Helen Kemp used to say. All those things, which I believe, but I feel them in my bones now in a way that maybe I didn't before. That it's not just the emotional calling up to a better place that choral music does for us, but it affects me physically. That I need it, like a deer that pants for water, so long I, for thee, O Lord. I understand that text now in a way that I maybe didn't quite before. That one looks at the news. In the past, one looks at the news, and then I go to rehearsal. And I hear this chord, and I look at these faces, and I read these texts, and I'm filled, and I find balance. And it is part of the way that I find God and find my fellow humans and find balance in the world. And so that's what I need. And that's what I am looking forward to receiving from music making, and what I'm looking forward to being able to give to others through music making. Drilling down to the, when does that happen and how is still an open question. But that's kind of where I am right now.
Good. Anton, you want to talk about what you're looking forward to?
Well, I think music is a healing balm, and I think we need that. And as I said, we've been healthy and we have some degree of music, but when a quartet cannot make up for my voice being lifted up. And I look forward to the time when we can be in a gathered community. We become that big choir that all of our voices are lifted up and singing. I look forward to a time when we can be back face to face, and I'm going to say unmasked, so I can see the smiles on people's faces. I can see sometimes if somebody's upset, I see the frown on the forehead, but I want to be able to see their faces. I look forward to the time, Mark, you've known me for years. I'm a hugger. I have felt starved from human contact, and I have the former First Lady of Samuel College is now 95, Lois Rand. And I call her every week, and she's been in isolation, in this. And the biggest thing I said is, when I can get in there, you will get the longest hug from me. And our music becomes that hug as well, And I will tell you, I've been very appreciative. The Psalms have been my stronghold for these 10 months. And I go from 131, out of the depths have I cried. There are a lot of that through, but I'm a good Lutheran. And Psalm 46, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. And those, as Eric just said, they're not words anymore, just things that may be a text and music. Those were the things that Psalm 46, I think I was in, as Michelle Obama said, I was in low-grade depression a fair amount of the summer. And it was those texts that I turned to when I didn't even want to get out of bed in the morning, you know, I would read that and it was like, get your butt out of bed, take a shower, finally shave after 4 days. And the Psalms gave me some solace and they gave me strength. And that we go back to those texts, again, as I said before, we go back to texts that people need and will feed their souls when they leave Sunday morning or whenever they rehearse as a group, you know.
Well, and you know, what we find in these texts that we didn't even know were there, You know, after the things yesterday, or day before yesterday at the Capitol, somebody posted the Randall Thompson Choose Something Like a Star text that has lines in it that blew me away, that I've sung for years and we publish, and had new meaning. You know, that, yeah, I completely get that. So, David?
Well, yeah, thanks for that. Because that, I was just going to say, it's just been amazing how different phrases of texts pop out in a whole different way. You know, a line that's buried in the third stanza. Oh, we shouldn't say buried, but people think is buried in the third stanza that jumps out. And I think the profound experience with that was with National Lutheran Choir doing a concert the day that the Sandy Hook shootings happened. And we were in St. Louis, Mark, you were there. And we sang Away in a Manger, which all of us have sung since we were kids. And there's that line, bless all the dear children in thy tender care. And the choir had a horrible time trying to go on from that point because it just hit them all. They had never quite felt the meaning of that line in the same way and never will again, you know. And so I think what I'm looking forward to, though, and I'll go back to your question, is savoring the experience that we can have together. I wonder how much it's been taken for granted for me that we can get together and sing, that we can rehearse. I think we enjoy the rehearsals as much as anything else, and to not be able to do that is so hard. And the one thing that's important is understanding my role, and when we come back and are able to savor that experience again, what is my most important role in that, is really the same for both the National Lutheran Choir and the church choir and the church congregation singing, is that my role is going to be to help illuminate what's best possible for them to do, you know, so that we don't plan things. Anton, you talked about that. It's not dumbing down, but it's more of a stewardship of what's possible and understanding what they can do well, because anybody, no matter how amateur they consider themselves musically, knows when they didn't do well and don't respond to that very well. So our job is to make sure that we give them things that they can do well, and then to help, our job is to expose that, is to draw it out of them, and then we get to get out of the way, and they then are allowed to do the proclamation through music that they can do best. And it's a challenge understanding where that level is. I experience that when I'm traveling doing hymn festivals and I have a choir for one rehearsal. That first 5 minutes is pretty important. You know, that list forms right away. What am I going to go after here? And how is it going to become the best? And it sometimes it involves, okay, we're not doing that stanza, we're going to do that one in unison, or which can also be beautiful, as you said, Anton, or adjust it so that it's something they can do really, really well. And I think that we have to be ready to be very flexible with that.
Okay.
We don't know what we're going to bump into.
Have Tim weigh in, and then I'm going to close with Mel, if that's okay. So, Tim?
I'm really inspired with everything that I hear. And I think one of the things that I'm looking forward to is getting groups back together and singing, performing together. But I'm also looking forward to maintaining what we've learned, that sometimes our audiences, I've noticed in our video, we probably hit a larger audience with our holiday concert on YouTube than we normally do in the regular type of year. So I think in churches, we're going to be re-exploring the possibility of doing both worship with everyone gathered and worship by video to reach more people. So I think we've learned quite a bit. I'm looking forward to exploring both of those sides.
Yeah, good. Well, Mel, I hate to leave it to you to wrap it up, but I think we're going to. So any words for us about what you're looking forward to?
Yay and amen to all the sublime things that have just been said. I'm going to say a very ordinary thing. I'm looking forward to rest. It has been exhausting. My hat is off to every church musician who has had to reinvent the wheel every week, week after week, to find some way to create meaningful worship in a context which none of us were trained to do. And it is the same thing for me teaching a course that I have taught for 20 years. And I cannot just go into class and teach it the way I used to. I have to work out the videos and I have to set up the Zoom so I am looking forward to being able to fall back on old habits and teach a little bit out of my hip pocket and get a good night's sleep. And I wish that for all of you.
Amen.
Oh, what a great word. What a great word. Well, I just want to say I appreciate all of you and what you do, what you bring. And I'm looking forward to the day that we can all be together and do that hugging there, Anton. So thank you all for taking a few moments to do this. I think that you have shared some things. I'm always going to take away some of those images that you all have shared. And I think your words of inspiration have been great. So thank you.
Mark,
Yes.
Yeah, Mark, thank you for being you and your company for shepherding us during these times. A lot of folks don't do that. You have done that. You have been the servant leader. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for that, Anton. So thank you all. Have a great day.